12:01 p.m. Eastern Time, January 20th, 2025. The precise moment when Donald Trump's hand leaves the Bible after taking the presidential oath will be remembered as the exact minute when 248 years of American economic dominance ended forever. Not because of Trump's policies, not because of political ideology, because of mathematical timing that creates perfect conditions for empire recognition events that transform gradual decline into immediate crisis. January 20th represents more than political transition. It represents the moment when empire leadership change occurs exactly when underlying economic mathematics have reached unsustainable levels that no leadership can solve through conventional policy measures. But here's what makes Trump's inauguration historically significant. It follows the exact same pattern that has triggered empire collapse throughout recorded history when leadership transitions coincide with mathematical impossibility beyond political solutions. The sequence is predictable, the timing is precise, and Inauguration Day 2025 represents perfect convergence of leadership change with economic crisis that creates conditions for immediate rather than gradual imperial breakdown. This has happened before, 3 times in documented imperial history. Same sequence, same devastating outcome. And Trump's inauguration confirms that America has entered the final phase of the same cycle that destroyed Roman political authority, eliminated British global influence, and triggered Soviet systemic collapse when leadership changes occurred during mathematical impossibility. While mainstream analysis focuses on political transitions and policy expectations, inauguration timing reveals something that only becomes visible when you understand imperial mathematics during leadership changes. This isn't about Trump's capabilities or political strategies. This is about what happens when empire leadership transitions occur exactly when underlying economic problems have reached mathematical impossibility that no political leadership can solve. By the end of this analysis, you'll understand exactly what January 20th represents beyond political ceremony, why it matters more than policy platforms or political appointments, and what historical precedent tells us about empire survival when leadership changes coincide with mathematical crisis. Because there's a timing relationship here, a convergence between political transitions and economic impossibility that creates recognition events beyond any single leader's ability to control or prevent. The inauguration is scheduled, the mathematics are absolute. The only question is whether you'll recognize what January 20th actually represents. Every empire in recorded history has discovered that leadership transitions during mathematical crisis create recognition events that expose systemic problems beyond political solutions, rather than providing opportunities for policy corrections. Leadership changes during empire stability provide opportunities for policy adjustment and strategic redirection. Leadership changes during mathematical impossibility expose the reality that systemic problems exceed political solutions, regardless of leadership capabilities. International markets, allied relationships, and economic systems respond to mathematical reality rather than political promises, when leadership transitions occur during crisis periods that have reached unsustainable levels. Roman Empire experienced this dynamic during 3rd century succession crisis, when rapid leadership changes exposed fiscal mathematics beyond any emperor's ability to solve through political measures. Roman succession between 235 to 284 AD involved 50 emperors in 50 years, not because of political instability alone, because each new emperor discovered that imperial fiscal problems had reached mathematical impossibility that no political leadership could address through conventional means. Each succession created hope for policy solutions. Each new emperor promised fiscal reform and economic recovery. Each leadership change initially generated optimism among Roman citizens and allied populations. But underlying mathematics remained unchanged regardless of leadership capabilities or political promises. Government debt exceeded revenue generation by margins that required currency debasement regardless of emperor preferences. Military costs exceeded imperial resources regardless of strategic priorities. Provincial tax compliance decreased regardless of administrative efficiency. Rapid succession exposed that Roman problems were mathematical rather than political. No single leader could solve fiscal impossibility through policy changes, because problems exceeded political solutions. International recognition of this reality triggered systematic breakdown. Allied kingdoms reduced cooperation with Rome. Trading partners developed alternative commercial relationships. Provincial populations decreased tax compliance because imperial promises lacked mathematical foundation. Roman leadership changes during mathematical crisis accelerated rather than prevented imperial decline, because each transition exposed systemic problems beyond political solutions while creating recognition events that triggered systematic response from international observers. British Empire faced identical dynamics during royal and political transitions between 1910 to 1936, when leadership changes occurred during imperial overextension beyond sustainable economic capacity. British leadership transitions during this period included King Edward VII's death, King George V's accession, World War I leadership crisis, multiple prime minister changes, King Edward V abdication, and King George VI coronation. Each transition created expectations for imperial recovery and economic stability. Each new leadership promised solutions for imperial overextension and fiscal challenges. Each change initially generated optimism among British citizens and Commonwealth populations. But imperial mathematics remained unchanged regardless of leadership quality or political strategies. Imperial costs exceeded imperial revenue by margins that required domestic taxation and debt accumulation regardless of leadership preferences. Colonial administration expenses exceeded colonial benefits regardless of efficiency improvements. International competition reduced British commercial advantages regardless of policy innovations. Leadership transitions exposed that British problems were mathematical rather than political. No single leader or political party could solve imperial overextension through policy changes because problems exceeded sustainable resource capacity. International recognition of this reality triggered systematic imperial retrenchment. Commonwealth nations developed independent economic relationships. International partners reduced dependence on British commercial and financial systems. Colonial populations increased resistance to imperial administration because British promises lacked economic foundation. British leadership changes during mathematical impossibility accelerated rather than prevented imperial decline because each transition exposed overextension beyond political solutions while creating recognition events that triggered systematic response from international observers. Soviet Union experienced identical pattern during leadership transitions between 1982 and 1991 when succession changes occurred during economic mathematics beyond sustainable socialist system capacity. Soviet leadership transitions included Brezhnev death, Andropov succession, Chernenko transition, Gorbachev reforms, and eventual system collapse. Each change created expectations for economic recovery and systemic improvement. Each new leader promised solutions for Soviet economic stagnation and systemic inefficiencies. Each transition initially generated optimism among Soviet citizens and Warsaw Pact populations about socialist system revival. But Soviet mathematics remained unchanged regardless of leadership capabilities or reform strategies. Central planning inefficiencies exceeded correction possibilities through political measures. Military expenditure exceeded economic generation by margins that required resource reallocation from domestic infrastructure. International competition reduced Soviet technological advantages regardless of leadership priorities. Leadership transitions exposed that Soviet problems were mathematical rather than political. No single leader could solve systemic inefficiencies through policy reforms because problems exceeded socialist system capacity to generate resources required for competitive international position. International recognition of this reality triggered systematic Warsaw Pact dissolution. Allied nations developed alternative economic relationships. International partners reduced engagement with Soviet commercial systems. Domestic populations increased resistance to central planning because Soviet promises lacked economic foundation. Soviet leadership changes during mathematical impossibility accelerated rather than prevented system collapse because each transition exposed systemic problems beyond political solutions while creating recognition events that triggered systematic response from domestic and international observers. 3 examples spanning 17 centuries. Identical leadership transition pattern. Identical recognition outcome. Identical imperial acceleration toward collapse. Leadership changes during mathematical impossibility expose systemic problems beyond political solutions rather than providing opportunities for policy corrections. Now, let me show you why Trump's inauguration follows this exact historical sequence with perfect timing for recognition events that transform gradual American decline into immediate crisis. American economic mathematics have reached unsustainable levels that create perfect conditions for inauguration recognition events that expose systemic problems beyond political solutions. National debt, $38.5 trillion and growing $2 billion daily. Interest payments, $1.1 trillion annually, exceeding defense spending. Currency purchasing power, declined 43% since 2020. International reserves, dollar share dropped from 71% to 59% over 25 years. These mathematics exist regardless of political leadership or policy preferences. No president can solve fiscal impossibility through political measures because problems exceed policy solution capacity. Trump's inauguration occurs exactly when international observers have perfect timing to recognize that American problems are mathematical rather than political, systemic rather than leadership dependent. International markets respond to mathematical reality during leadership transitions. If new leadership cannot solve systemic problems through policy measures, markets recognize mathematical impossibility and adjust positions accordingly. Capital flight begins when international investors recognize that leadership changes cannot solve underlying mathematics through conventional policy interventions. Foreign government responses change when allied nations understand that American systemic problems exceed American leadership capacity to address through political solutions. Trade relationship adjustments accelerate when commercial partners recognize that American economic mathematics create unreliable partnerships regardless of leadership promises. The timing creates perfect conditions for simultaneous recognition events across multiple international observers who conclude that American systemic problems exceed political solutions during exactly the moment when new leadership takes responsibility for mathematical impossibility. But Trump's inauguration creates additional recognition factors that historical precedent shows accelerate international response to imperial mathematical crisis. Trump's previous presidency provides international observers with direct experience of American leadership capabilities and policy approaches. International markets and governments can compare previous Trump performance with current American mathematical challenges. Previous Trump policies occurred during relatively stable American economic conditions. Current inauguration occurs during mathematical impossibility that exceeds previous challenge levels by massive margins. International comparison between previous Trump capabilities and current mathematical requirements reveals gap between leadership capacity and systemic problems that creates recognition events beyond Trump's ability to control through policy announcements. International observers recognize that current American problems exceed previous American problems by margins that make previous policy approaches inadequate for current mathematical challenges. Previous Trump policies occurred during relatively stable American economic conditions. Current inauguration occurs during mathematical impossibility that exceeds previous challenge levels by massive margins. International comparison between previous Trump capabilities and current mathematical requirements reveals gap between leadership capacity and systemic problems that creates recognition events beyond Trump's ability to control through policy announcements. International observers recognize that current American problems exceed previous American problems by margins that make previous policy approaches inadequate for current mathematical challenges. This recognition triggers systematic international response during inauguration period, because international observers conclude simultaneously that American systemic problems exceed American political solutions, regardless of leadership quality. But there's something more significant about January 20th timing that historical precedent shows creates maximum recognition impact during leadership transitions. Global financial markets operate on calendar schedules that create maximum attention during American leadership transitions. International observers focus simultaneously on American political changes exactly when American mathematical problems become most visible. Inauguration timing forces international markets and governments to evaluate American systemic problems simultaneously during maximum attention periods that create coordinated recognition events rather than gradual awareness development. Market psychology during leadership transitions amplifies recognition effects because international observers conclude simultaneously rather than individually about American mathematical impossibility. The convergence creates recognition acceleration that transforms gradual international awareness into immediate international response during inauguration period. Historical precedent shows this timing pattern always creates maximum international impact because simultaneous recognition generates coordinated response that individual recognition cannot achieve. International capital flight accelerates during coordinated recognition events. International trade adjustments happen simultaneously rather than gradually. International political relationships change systemically rather than individually. Trump's inauguration timing creates perfect conditions for maximum recognition impact that triggers systematic international response to American mathematical impossibility. But inauguration recognition events reveal something fundamental about American position that no political leadership can modify through policy measures. American economic dominance depended on international cooperation and voluntary participation in dollar-based systems. When international observers recognize that American mathematics make cooperation disadvantageous, voluntary participation ends regardless of American leadership quality. International cooperation with empires facing mathematical impossibility creates costs for cooperating nations while providing decreasing benefits through empire decline acceleration. Smart international observers withdraw cooperation during empire mathematical crisis to avoid costs associated with empire collapse, while developing alternative relationships that provide superior long-term advantages. Inauguration recognition events provide perfect timing for international observers to withdraw American cooperation simultaneously while implementing alternative arrangements coordinated among non-American partners. This withdrawal eliminates American ability to solve mathematical problems through international cooperation exactly when American problems require international cooperation most desperately. The timing trap creates mathematical impossibility, acceleration, because American problems exceed American domestic solution capacity, while international solution capacity withdraws during recognition events. Trump's inauguration doesn't create American problems. It coincides with perfect timing for international recognition that American problems exceed political solutions, which triggers international withdrawal that makes American problems unsolvable through any policy measures. The mathematics were already impossible. The inauguration provides timing for recognition events that expose impossibility while eliminating solution alternatives through international withdrawal. January 20th represents the moment when international observers recognize simultaneously that American empire has reached mathematical impossibility beyond political solutions, which triggers systematic withdrawal that completes imperial breakdown. Recognition events don't create empire problems. They expose problems that already existed while triggering responses that eliminate empire solutions. Capacity. Trump-I's inauguration occurs at perfect timing for recognition events that transform gradual American decline into immediate crisis through international response to mathematical impossibility. The pattern never changes because mathematical impossibility always generates recognition events during leadership transitions that expose systemic problems beyond political solutions. Historical precedent shows what happens next. International withdrawal accelerates. Alternative systems expand. Empire mathematics reach conclusion through recognition events that no leadership can prevent or control. January 20th, 2025 represents more than political transition. It represents recognition timing that exposes American mathematical impossibility while triggering international response that completes imperial breakdown. The inauguration is scheduled. The mathematics are absolute. The recognition events are inevitable. Political transitions during mathematical impossibility always create recognition events that accelerate rather than prevent empire collapse through exposure of systemic problems beyond political solutions. Trump's inauguration confirms the pattern while providing perfect timing for recognition events that complete the sequence. Leadership transitions don't solve empire mathematics. They expose mathematical impossibility while triggering recognition events that eliminate solution possibilities. January 20th approaches with mathematical certainty. Recognition events follow historical precedent. Imperial breakdown accelerates according to pattern that no political leadership can modify. The inauguration represents recognition timing rather than solution opportunity. Mathematical impossibility exposed during perfect international observation moment. Empire mathematics reach conclusion on schedule. Political transitions provide timing for recognition events that complete historical pattern. January 20th, 2025. The day American empire officially ended through recognition events triggered by leadership transition during mathematical impossibility. The pattern demands it. History confirms it. Mathematics guarantee it. Inauguration Day represents recognition rather than beginning. The end was already mathematical certainty. January 20th provides timing for international observers to recognize what sophisticated analysis predicted months earlier. American economic dominance ends exactly when international recognition events expose mathematical impossibility during leadership transition that cannot solve systemic problems beyond political capacity. The timing is perfect. The recognition is inevitable. The outcome is written by mathematical certainty disguised as political transition. Trump's inauguration triggers the final recognition events that complete 248 years of American imperial mathematics. January 20th represents the moment when gradual becomes immediate through recognition events that expose mathematical impossibility beyond political solutions. The date is set. The pattern is absolute. The recognition approaches with historical certainty. American empire ends, not through military defeat, but through recognition events that expose mathematical impossibility during leadership transition timing that no political solutions can overcome. January 20th, 2025. The exact moment when recognition becomes reality and American dominance becomes American history.